Yellowstone Eruption. Is it really about to blow? You're watching this channel. The year is 2022, and we're about halfway through it. And for the last few months, there have been a lot of headlines stating that the Yellowstone supervolcano is about to blow. There are signs that something big is happening below the surface. But what do these signs actually mean? Now, in all honesty, the media can sensationalize anything and make it seem way scarier than it actually is. And when it comes to natural disasters, especially ones that could potentially wipe out life as we know it, it's important to stay level-headed and informed with actual facts. So we're going to break down everything you need to know about the Yellowstone supervolcano and the recent events that have sparked these recent eruption claims. Let's get started. Before we dive into the topic at hand, let's take a moment to answer some basic questions that might be on your mind right now. For starters, where is Yellowstone, and why should you care if it erupts? Well, Yellowstone National Park spans across 3 states in the western part of the U.S. It's mainly located in Wyoming, but extends a bit into Montana and Idaho. The park was established in 1872 and is famous for its geothermal features, including Old Faithful. But the reason that so many people care whether or not Yellowstone erupts is because of its magma chamber. Yellowstone sits atop one of the largest magma chambers on Earth. This massive molten rock reserve is 43 by 29 miles, which is large enough to fit 14 American football fields stacked on top of each other. Now, this chamber isn't just beneath the national park. It extends far beyond it into the surrounding areas. And while most of the magma lies 4 to 6 miles beneath the surface, some parts of it come much closer to the surface, sitting just 1 to 2 miles beneath the ground. And that brings us to our next point. If you've been reading up on Yellowstone recently, you may have heard that magma has been found just 14 miles beneath the park. This discovery, published by a team of scientists in the Journal of Geophysical Research, used data collected from seismic activity around the area. Now, before we go further, it's important to note that when scientists say magma has been found, they don't necessarily mean that there's a new magma chamber that wasn't known about before. Rather, they mean that they discovered more magma in existing magma chambers. And this magma chamber doesn't even pose any significant threat of an eruption. The magma found by the research team sits roughly 9 to 12 miles beneath the northwest corner of Yellowstone. And while they did find that it's hotter than anticipated, it doesn't really change anything. In fact, it supports existing theories that the magma chamber is connected to the larger magma system that feeds Yellowstone's hydrothermal features. Essentially, there's nothing particularly alarming about this discovery. Instead, it provides a better understanding of how the magma chamber works and how it influences the geysers and hot springs that Yellowstone is famous for. So we got that cleared up. What about the claims that Yellowstone supervolcano could erupt because of caldera collapse? Now, if you're not familiar with the term caldera, it's basically a large crater formed by a volcano after it erupts. In the case of Yellowstone, it's formed from 3 major eruptions that occurred thousands of years ago. The first 2 were roughly the same size, occurring 2.1 and 1.3 million years ago. Then the last and largest explosion happened 630,000 years ago. It's these ancient explosions that give Yellowstone its supervolcano status. After each eruption, a massive amount of ash, rock, and gases were released into the atmosphere, forming huge calderas. Over time, the land slowly rebuilt itself over the calderas, but they still remain and are visible today. So what does any of this have to do with a potential eruption? Well, according to some experts, the collapse of one or more of these calderas could lead to a supereruption. But again, this isn't something that's imminent or even likely to happen anytime soon. In fact, most scientists agree that it would take a series of very unlikely events to cause such a catastrophic event. One theory suggests that a massive earthquake could destabilize one of the calderas, leading to a landslide. That landslide could then cause a domino effect, triggering the collapse of the other calderas and causing a gigantic explosion. But again, this is just one of many unlikely scenarios. Now, this is where things start to get interesting. As of May 2022, There have been almost 2,000 earthquakes near Yellowstone National Park. Most of these earthquakes were pretty small, ranging between 1.5 and 3.0 on the Richter scale. However, there were also several larger earthquakes, including a magnitude 4.8 earthquake that struck just outside the park in the small town of West Yellowstone. These earthquakes were unusual because they occurred in an area known as the Yellowstone Seismic Zone. This is an area about the size of Connecticut, with very little seismic activity recorded throughout history. However, since 1985, there has been a noticeable increase in earthquakes within the zone. And while the earthquakes themselves aren't necessarily cause for alarm, they do indicate that something is happening beneath the surface. Now, it's important to remember that earthquakes are a normal part of the geological processes that occur in places like Yellowstone. The area is highly monitored, and the United States Geological Survey is constantly keeping track of any changes or unusual activity. But while the recent earthquakes aren't a cause for panic, they do provide an interesting case study for scientists. They help researchers better understand the complex systems that exist beneath the surface and allow them to refine their models of how the magma chamber behaves. So let's get to the bottom of this. When it comes to predicting volcanic eruptions, there are a few key signs that scientists look out for. Increased earthquake activity, changes in gas emissions and ground deformation are all indicators that an eruption could be on the horizon. However, it's important to remember that these signs don't necessarily mean that an eruption is imminent. In fact, sometimes these signs can occur without any eruption taking place for many years, even decades. It's kind of like getting a check engine light on your car's dashboard. It lets you know that something needs attention, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your car is about to break down. Now, in the case of Yellowstone, none of these warning signs have been observed. Yes, there's been an increase in earthquake activity, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. As we mentioned earlier, earthquakes are normal in this area. Plus, increased earthquake activity has been observed in the past without any major eruptions taking place. Same goes for changes in gas emissions and ground deformation. Scientists monitor these closely, but they haven't observed any significant changes that would indicate an upcoming eruption. According to the United States Geological Survey, there is a 14 to 17% chance of an eruption at Yellowstone in the next 1,000 years, and only a 1% chance of an eruption in the next 24,000 years. While these numbers might sound scary, it's important to remember that they're based on very complex models and computer simulations. Plus, they apply to a very long time frame. A 1,000-year time span is really long, and it allows scientists to calculate the likelihood of an eruption based on historical data and patterns. Yellowstone has been monitored for decades, and the USGS uses this data to inform their predictions. They take into account things like the frequency of past eruptions, the size of those eruptions, and the current state of the magma chamber. Again, while these numbers might seem alarming, it's important to keep them in perspective. A 14% chance of an eruption over 1,000 years is relatively low, and the chance of an eruption in the next 24,000 years is even smaller. So, what does all of this information tell us? Is it time to start worrying about a potential Yellowstone eruption? Well, not really. Yes, there are signs that something is happening beneath the surface of Yellowstone. And yes, it's true that an eruption could potentially be devastating, but it's important to stay level-headed and rely on the experts for information. Scientists are constantly monitoring Yellowstone, and they haven't sounded any alarms. Sure, there's always the possibility of an eruption, but it's not something that we need to be concerned about right now. If there is any real danger, the authorities will be quick to let us know. Instead of worrying about a potential eruption, we should appreciate the incredible natural wonder that is Yellowstone National Park. It's a place that has captured the imagination of people for generations, and it's home to some of the most amazing wildlife and scenery in the world. So, instead of letting fear get the best of us, let's focus on protecting this special place for future generations to enjoy.